recording. All right.
Well, welcome to On the Spectrum. I am Nick, and that's Steve. We're going to start another wonderful episode with apparently less energy than we usually do.
Today, we want to talk about acceptance and maybe a sprinkle or a dash of adult autism and some other fun things.
Quite possibly.
When I say acceptance, I mean a lot of things. Because everybody talks about autism awareness. But nobody talks about autism acceptance.
Somewhat. But when they say acceptance, it doesn't seem like they mean the same thing as what actual acceptance would be.
We see all the time people in ASD or neurodivergent communities shitting on neurotypicals and complaining about NTs all the time.
Yes.
And we have in the past talked about how,
we've shit on neurotypicals in the show before.
Yes, but we also say that sometimes they go a little too far with the shitting on NTs.
Right.
And you can't just blame everything on it.
I realized my hat was in the frame.
But I think today we want to talk about some of the struggles or issues that come into play with acceptance. So it's one thing to be aware that somebody's autistic.
Or somebody's just different.
Yeah, or somebody's different.
Somebody's different in some way.
And autism presents itself differently depending on the individual. They might have different support levels. They might have different ways of stimming or different behaviors.
And so does every difference about somebody. And every mental health, I don't even want to call them issues or disorders or any of that shit anymore. But there's a difference in, there's differences for all of it. No two people who have bipolar are the same. Right. And not just personality wise, they're different, but even their presentation of bipolar symptomology is different to a degree. But yet, I hear, obviously, because we deal in autism more so than anything else when it comes to social media and what we read about, everybody always says, if you met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, but that applies to everything. But we don't show the same level of understanding that there are differences in all of these different things as people are hoping for autism, or at least autism people are hoping that people will have for autism.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, it's one thing to say that you are aware of those differences or aware that somebody's autistic or aware that somebody's bipolar, but it's different. There's a difference between actually showing acceptance or showing some level of accommodation, because your expectations in your brain never match reality.
Well, that's true. Well, if you think about the amount of different pieces into somebody's thought process that they have to piece apart to be able to have real acceptance for somebody, a real understanding and acceptance for how somebody behaves. They have to strip away not only the social conditioned expectations that they have on them being whatever gender they are, or lack of gender for that matter, or what sexuality they are, or lack of sexuality, or different sexuality than they are. And then you have to piece apart what race they are and the expectation of that, or the stigma to it, or the part of the country they're from, or if they wear glasses or not, or if they're bald or not, or if they're fat or not. There's a lot of different pieces that go into acceptance, and only talking about one piece of accepting a human being, in my opinion, is we're leaving out a lot of things that still make difference to that human being.
No, you do.
I'm sorry to jump on that like that, and I went all heady and shit.
But that part of it is taking into that would actually, what you're describing actually sounds kind of like intersectional feminism.
Well, then let's call it that.
Intersectionality, kind of, which means when you're talking about social hierarchies, right? Yeah. You're taking into account it's one thing if somebody's a woman, but what if they're a woman and they're black, or if you're gay but you're a gay black male, or you're this. There's different criteria. There's different things that affect it besides just being gay or just being a man or just being a woman or just being trans.
We're not looking at things in boxes.
Right.
And I will say, when it comes to acceptance, there's a difference between somebody saying they accept somebody and truly accepting somebody for who they are. And a lot of things that I read and a lot of people I deal with talk about how they accept other people, but they don't actually accept anything. they're saying it and they're waving the flag of, giving a shit about people, but they don't accept anybody for any way they are, because there's still a level of expectation you will behave X no matter what. And that doesn't make sense, because real acceptance is identifying and understanding the person that stands before you. Yeah. Not their pieces, not their labels, not their words, but the human being who stands before you, which means there's a whole lot about that person you don't know. And to accept their behavior as being them, opposed to, they might be a little this or that. Oh, well, I don't know about that. Right.
I think,
and it comes down to acceptance.
I've gone through rabbit holes of trying to understand different people. By doing thought experiments where I put myself in their shoes. That's how I try to understand people.
I understand.
I'm not saying that works for everybody, but for me, what I'll do is I try to imagine what it would be like to be that person.
Well, so here's my question on that. And I know we've had this conversation previously where I've posed
it's also
I want to pose it here. When it comes to putting yourself in somebody else's shoe, okay? And this is not me arguing with you. This is me just posing this question, challenging the thought, if you will. How can you put yourself in somebody else's shoes if you, A, have never lived in those shoes, and B,
you can't necessarily.
Hold on. And B, if you don't know all the pieces that fit in those shoes.
Because you just try to do the best job you can with the information. So like, I might not be able to put myself in the shoes of a black woman, right? Because I don't know what it's like to be black. I don't know what it's like to be a woman.
Okay. So how much of that shoe do you fit in?
I don't, but I try to imagine what it would be like for me if I was that person, and then think about some of the factors related to those things that don't affect me, so that I can try to understand a little bit better how that person might feel, even though I don't, not saying that I will understand exactly how that person feels, but it gives me a little bit more, it makes me a little bit more patient with people. But I don't mean black women. I mean,
you mean people. Yes.
Like people in general, that they might be dealing with certain things, or there may be things that I don't know about because of those factors. Well, but it's also made me, I don't get very emotional very often. I'm usually pretty reserved, but some of the times where I have gotten very emotional in the past, especially by myself, is when I've done those thought experiments trying to figure out like, what would it have been like to be this person? Or like, what would it have been like to be like a Jewish person in the Holocaust, like living through that? Like trying to think about what that would have been like, stuff like that. Or what would it be like to have to deal with racism every day? Like, what would that feel like? I don't know, but you try to imagine it.
So here's something I will say. And to me, like, we're putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. Most people would describe as empathy, right?
Sorry, that's my autistic
or
way
sympathy for that matter.
It's my autistic way of
I would actually say that one of the things that is a little lost in people's understanding, or at least the way people verbalize empathy and sympathy, is they always say, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the labels in which you just used, right? The identifiers that you just used. But remember, first and foremost, we're all human, right? Yeah. And so if we want to put ourselves, if we want to empathize, meaning emotionally understand, why can't we look at it from the standpoint of context of the situation we're trying to put ourselves in, as well as the fact that we're human? Now, does the fact that somebody would be African-American and a female, would that change context? Yes. But does that drastically change what emotion you may be feeling in that moment? Maybe yes, maybe no. I don't 100% know.
So we're talking about acceptance.
Yeah.
And we were kind of going into, I mean, think empathy is important to have. But I guess what we're trying to get at is that if you're neurodivergent, if you're autistic, if you have ADHD, if you have any number of different, I don't know what you would say. If your brain don't work like everybody else's brain works, then
I like how you put a Southern voice on that.
It may be difficult for other people to actually show you some level of acceptance, because they have certain expectations. Like everybody has certain expectations about how they think the world should be or how people should behave. It's kind of like if you were to walk into if this was a medieval Europe, right? Mm-hmm. And you walked into a fancy dinner in the King's Banquet, and they have, all right, this is your salad fork and this is your dinner fork. And then you start just picking up everything and just eating however the hell you want. They might think that, oh, this person is behaving inappropriately. He's using his dinner fork on his soup. What is he doing? You can't even eat soup with a fork.
Well, yeah, that's like rich folk.
Yeah.
That's like how rich
folk
folk
that's a crappy analogy I'm using, but the expectation is that you come to dinner and this is how you behave. Don't they actually have classes where people go to learn etiquette?
Yeah.
Etiquette classes, right?
Yeah.
You have certain etiquette. This is how you're supposed to behave.
Right.
I'm using that as an analogy for being neurodivergent is like people have certain expectations in society or whatever culture you're from.
Right.
It might be the expectations might be different if you live in like Puerto Rico versus Boston.
And it is.
But
there are different expectations.
There are social expectations, and people expect certain behavior, and that what's appropriate may be different depending on where you live.
So
when you don't meet those,
and I will say that like that kind of stuff. So you're talking about like etiquette and manners and stuff like that, but I mean let's talk about this in a real way.
Well, I'm just using the etiquette and manners as an analogy.
I know you are. I'm trying to get more real about it. When it comes to mental differences, when it comes to neurological differences, when it comes to behavior differences in people get real hard up about how we should and should not behave. And no matter how accepting and compassionate and understanding and intelligent they are, no matter how much experience, and even if they have their own lived experience with having one of these things, they still look at somebody else's behavior and go good or bad. And I weirdly enough, we're talking about this today, and I just saw a post on Facebook from another autistic creator who was just talking about how autism doesn't give you the right to be mean or rude or something like that. And I kept thinking about like the amount of times that I've been called rude in my life when how come they get to decide that when all I was doing was asking a question? I had no ill intention towards it. And I know you've probably had those moments too, but here's the thing about acceptance though. Like if we're really going to have acceptance for another human being, and we're all going to say we're all different and unique and individualized, if we're going to say we're going to accept and understand and have compassion for other human beings, then we actually have to truly actually accept them. We're going to have to look at and decide for ourselves that we're not going to automatically assume the worst in any given moment. Because
I think social media doesn't help that either.
Well,
I know we weren't really going to talk about social media per se, but like
let's
I think some of the social media stuff
expectation
helps people jump to those conclusions because it's easy to just jump on the, like we talked about echo chambers and stuff in the past, but like it's easy to just jump on the bandwagon of hate, of jumping on pigpiling somebody or singling out a particular thing about somebody and then jumping on that and saying that person's a piece of shit or that person's an asshole.
I also think it makes it easy for people to jump on the compassion train, if you will. I think I'm using that, or maybe the understanding train. I don't fucking know. On the opposite side of that, not just hating somebody or a group of people or whatever, putting them in that box, but I think on the other side of it too, it also causes people to hyperbole. Yeah,
hyperbole.
Yeah, no,
or hyperbolic.
Hyperbolic. Thank you. Their opinion in one way or the other, period. But I think that's always been there. I think it's just more apparent to the rest of us that happens.
Or
right?
Like people who know nothing about the war in Ukraine, they got Ukrainian flags everywhere.
Yes,
that's what I'm saying. I don't actually like have a strong opinion on the whole Ukraine thing.
No,
like I agree with. I don't know if this will get me in trouble, but like I agree with some of the arguments.
So let's not say that then.
Well, I mean, I agree with some of the arguments on both sides as far as like whether it's like a good idea to be like what level of involvement we should have. On one hand, like you don't want the country to just be taken over by Russia, but at the other hand, like I don't like helping kill other people. So like I have a moral issue with war in general. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is that people will show their support for something even if they have no fucking clue what they're supporting.
None whatsoever. And that'll be pro or con to any given subject. And sometimes the pro part of that also hurts people just as much because you're doing less accepting as well. So like to use some of the terminology folks on the ticker talker there use, their infantilization. There you go. Of the autisms. And something about that is those people who are on there and they're doing that, they're jumping on that positive train, right? They're jumping on that positive side of it. but it's not really acceptance because you're not actually looking at the human being in front of you. And
it's one thing to talk about it, but it's another thing to actually deal with the person in front of you.
Right. And
on a one-on-one basis.
That's something I was going to say too about acceptance is like, if we're going to say autism is different for everybody who has autism, okay, cool. So let's accept each other for that.
But also,
let's not automatically assume somebody's being fucking creepy when it makes us feel a little funky. But maybe the reason why we're feeling funky is because somebody else was creepy to us, and this behavior is similar to it. But maybe this person we got to give benefit of the doubt to. Let's not write them off.
Where do you draw the line, though?
I think the line needs to be drawn when we identify for this person that their behavior is not what we want around us. But if we automatically assume something about them, if we automatically decide what and why about that person before we actually know them.
So I'll give you an example. Let's say you have an autistic teenager who is prone to violence.
Okay.
Let's say they get they have a meltdown and they start swinging fists.
Right.
Now, you might not work with some. You might not attribute malice to that person's behavior, but you may also decide I don't want to be around that kind of person because of the way they behave.
Understood.
So a person might say, "Well, I don't want to be around that kid because he's going to swing his fist around. And I don't want to get hit. I don't have to deal with that." Even though
that's fine, then don't work with a level 3 autist.
But that doesn't mean but you're not attributing their behavior to like some sort of malice on their part. Like this, you're not saying, oh, they want to hurt me or they want to hurt people. They want to put people in harm's way. But you're saying, I'm accepting your behavior, but I don't want to be around it.
But with that level of, like, the example you gave is also an extreme example. Right. Okay. Or pseudo extreme. That's not because
I'm saying, where do you draw the line? So I'm saying, draw the line of, well, I don't want to be around somebody because they're going to swing fists at me, even if they don't mean to hurt me.
Well, I mean, and that's a line that you can draw and that would be more acceptable to draw because there's no assumption that you have to make in that. Of why they're throwing fists, right? They're throwing fists because they're frustrated about something, right? Or they're throwing fists because impulse control, whatever the case may be. Like I worked with a person at one point who had, a couple of things, and they would just out of nowhere, without showing any precursor signs, without being told no, without any real external trigger event, the person would just kind of hammer fist, at you, okay? And usually would swing towards the clavicle. Not that they were necessarily aiming for the clavicle, bone here, but they just kind of, hand came up, down, right? And there was one worker who would work with that person who, was like, I think this person is aiming. And I try to have conversations with them of like, not at all. Like, I don't even think they notice it's you. Like, they're just doing it because that's why they also end up hitting a wall that way too.
Repetitive behavior. You might move your arm the same way, muscle memory,
Yeah.
So if I always do this, I'm going to probably hit somebody around the same area.
I mean, ultimately that's kind of what it came to because like the person never would do this. They wouldn't, like this. It was always just, okay. It was always like this, right?
So you're probably going to hit the same spot on most people.
Relatively. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
but the person who was the worker, started to think that this person was aiming at them because, well, they were the ones who had to say no all the time to stuff. But the patient, the client you didn't have to say no to them for them to do that. You didn't have to take away something for them to do that. You didn't have to even speak to them for them to just get out of their chair and go meh at you. Like there wasn't necessarily a trigger. I mean, there was at times, but not always.
So then
hold on. Because I want to get away from the violent part of it.
Right. So I was saying
that's easy to decide.
Right, that's the extreme.
That's the easy part to decide.
I took you to the extreme on purpose.
Okay.
So now we worked
let's
out.
Back that track
we
up.
know what's acceptable.
Yeah.
Or we have a good idea of what is acceptable behavior.
Sure.
Now we have a good idea of what is not acceptable, what it's okay to say, all right, I don't want to be around this. Now, in the gray area, in the middle now, where do you draw the distinctions in between?
So I think some of that is a matter of this. I think in the middle, people need to be able to differentiate when it's your fucking issue or it's their fucking issue. And one thing that I noticed about, and yeah, I'm going to say it that way. One thing I've noticed about people on the TikTokers, the Instagramming, the Facebooking, they either attribute all of the negative behavior that somebody gives them onto the other person or onto themselves. And it's almost black and white that way, or this or that way. And I think there's a level of both. So if somebody says something to you, and here's like, and I don't think this is an extreme example, but correct me if I'm wrong or whatnot.
Depends on what you're about to say.
Well, yeah. No, that's what I mean. Correct. like if my example does not illustrate this, then fucking correct me. I'll come up with another one. If a young man of 15 walks up to a young lady who's 15, okay, equal age, right? And the boy goes, I think you're pretty in that dress. Okay. Depending on her experiences prior, she may think that's creepy. She may think that that is nice. She might think that, well, why is he telling me that? There's a lot of different reactions she could have because of previous experiences with somebody walking up and saying something to her.
Or also her relationship to the guy.
And the relationship to the guy. Right. It also depends on how he looks. Meaning, if, and I'm going to put this in term, I'm just going to lay it out there. If this is a gentleman who is a level 1 autist, who's already socially awkward, who doesn't shower on a regular basis for whatever reason, including because he's got sensory issues and he has a problem with it, if he walks up to her and says that, and she, I don't know, cheerleader or, whatever stereotypical, popular girl you want, she might find it creepy as shit because he is undesirable in her eyes. Not seeing it for what it is, which is this young man is just walking up to her and paying her a compliment.
Yeah, but I also think we have different expectations for 15-year-olds versus adults.
Well, even if it's a 23-year-old man who's walking up to a woman,
I'm saying kids, I wouldn't expect them to be as socially understanding because they.
No, and I'm not either. I'm actually giving this as an as an example for any adult who's listening to us. Even if. And I know this situation is weird because, like, some people would say, well, because women have to be more careful about when men hit on men, because some men might get.
But it would work if you reverse the sexes, it would still be the same thing.
I think so too.
If you had like a girl who's the same situation, level 1, maybe she doesn't shower, maybe she smells a little weird. Right.
Maybe she doesn't know how to comb her hair or look socially appropriate to whatever fucking.
And the guy might be like,
she's
has. Fucking weird. Like the guy might have a weird reaction, like, oh,
right.
It might not be. Maybe he's rude about it. Maybe he's not. Maybe he goes to his friends. He's like, yeah, that fucking creepy girl was
right. That right there. Maybe that fucking creepy girl. What's creepy about her paying you a compliment?
Yeah.
Well, what does she want out of it? Maybe she just wants to say that she thinks you're attractive. Maybe she just wants to say, hey, buddy, how you doing? Maybe that's it. Maybe if you're standing in line at Starbucks and you're a barista behind the counter, whether you're a male or a female, if somebody says, you look good today, and that's all they say to you, why not just take it that way? And some people might say, well, you're a guy. You don't understand what it's like to be a woman.
I think.
And you're right.
Hold.
Let me finish this real quick. Please hold just for a moment. And you're right. I don't know what it's like to be a woman in this society. I don't know the paranoias. I don't know the fears that you have. I don't know what it's like when a guy seems innocent up front, but then stalks you or something to that effect. But what I do know is taking it out on the next person because somebody else treated you ill is also not accepting that person for who they are as a human being. And treating them poorly or suspicious because somebody else treated you poorly or did horrible fucking shit to you. I don't know either way. I also think is doing a disservice to that human being who's just trying to be nice. Because yes, there are more shitty people than good people in this world. I think most people can agree to that. But we're also discounting the good in people because we've dealt with so much shitty. And I think we're also doing a disservice to themselves and ourselves by not allowing ourselves to think that there's somebody decent in this world. And yes, I bring up a lot of this because it does tie into
I think there's a couple problems with the scenario you laid out. So one,
thanks.
Hold on. No, I'm saying
no. I did ask you to do that.
I agree with what you said in general, but I think the specific example you picked is probably not the best example. Yep. And it also depends on the context of the situation. So like what you're saying makes more sense if it's somebody you interact with daily, whether it be a coworker or a classmate in school or somebody that maybe you run into more frequently. If it's just some random person you run into in the street, or if you're working at a coffee shop and a customer pays you a compliment, you don't owe that person anything, and you don't owe a stranger anything to give them that level of trust. I think people have to earn a certain level of trust, and it's okay for people to be a little bit guarded, especially if they have been taken advantage of in the past, or they have had bad experiences with creepy men.
But how come you being guarded gives you the right to treat somebody else as if they're lesser?
It's not. It depends on how, but as I said, it depends on the details. So
hold on though, because you said give trust to that person. I'm not saying give trust to anybody.
You're saying give them the benefit of the doubt.
No, what I'm saying is don't hold somebody else's poor behavior against the new person.
Yeah, but
that's what I'm saying.
The person who's receiving that, like I said, that's why the context matters. If I'm just a girl who works at a coffee shop, and this guy comes in, maybe he's a little weird, maybe he's autistic, and to me, he seems weird or creepy or strange.
Right, because you don't necessarily know if he's a level 1 or not. Right.
It depends on how you respond. The response could just be to ignore what he said. It could be to act like he's a weirdo. But
which is more often than not how people are going to react.
But it could be that you have dealt with a lot of creepy guys, and so, but like that girl working in the coffee shop has no obligation to treat that person in any particular way.
We have no obligation to treat anybody better or worse than anybody else. Just because we're friends with somebody. In fact, if we're friends with somebody, we should be able to say, if we have some relation to somebody, we should be able to be more honest with them. Well, that's also why I'm saying that honest with them.
The example you brought up is probably not the best, just because there's like there's some sort of implication there if you're going up, and if you're a young man approaching a young lady, there's kind of this implication that you're probably trying to hit on her, even if you're not.
But that's just it. It's that assumption. And a lot of this, from my point of view right now, where I'm sitting right now in this conversation, because you're right, there is more to be considered. There is some context to be considered.
So I was saying maybe a different example.
I'm talking about, so you can use any example and we can say that all examples are problematic in some way, because there's no good way to talk about what real acceptance is without piecing apart moments of assumption.
Well, so I think
because even if it's, excuse me just a second, even if it's a young man walking over to a barista who's a male and saying, "Hey man, you're looking pretty good today. Looking pretty swole."
Actually, you know what's funny? Dude would say. Reminded me of an example that happened the other day.
Okay.
We went to a dinner.
Right.
And Lauren told this lady that her dress was pretty.
Yeah.
And the lady said, "Oh, thanks, but I'm in a relationship." And Lauren was like, she said, I'm married. And Lauren was like, okay. Like, I don't know how you would take it that way, but.
Okay. I only laugh because like it's Lauren saying it.
Yeah. She just said, "Oh,
I know her."
She said, she told the lady she had a pretty dress, and her reaction was to say that she's married, which I thought was hilarious.
Right. So. It's the automatic assumption that somebody's going to hit on her.
Yeah.
I mean, that tells me a bunch about the woman who said it, but also it says something about like, we cannot pay compliments to each other without the automatic assumption that somebody's trying to fuck us. Yeah. And I'm sorry to say it so brazenly, but apparently that's all I'm good at is saying fucking inappropriate shit. So, yeah. So anyway, there is no good example. And I will say that the assumptions that we have, also understand that other people are making assumptions about us too. And so, but when somebody says the assumption to us, or when somebody makes an assumption about us, everybody cries out that everybody needs to accept them for who they fucking are. But we're not accepting anybody else. We're not accepting other people for who they are, but we're crying out for other people to accept us for who we are, but we're not giving it to other people. Like, nobody likes being assumed because of some visual, because of some race or gender or assumed gender or assumed sexuality. Nobody wants those assumptions on them. Nobody wants people to assume what background we had or what privileges we had or one thing or another, but we automatically do it to other people. And I understand that it's humanistic to do it. It's very human to do those things, but it hurts people too. And the people that we're hurting by this, for one, is autistic folk. Maybe not level 2s and 3s. Well, definitely not level 3s. Maybe their parents, but like level 1 autistic folk, low support need autistic people have tendency to have this issue when it comes to something more so than not, because some of the behavior, not everybody, by the way, who's level 1, but some of the folks are doing things that are benign. They're doing things without ill intention. They don't have some scheme behind what they're fucking doing. But it also comes to other people too. So I don't want to necessarily just say, "Oh, these people are treated poorly." I want to say everybody's doing it to each other, because I see it a lot of places I go. Like, everybody wants to feel accepted and loved. and I'm going to boil this down to the simplest way I think I can say this. Everybody wants to feel accepted and loved by somebody, by anybody.
Social acceptance.
They want to feel validated. They want to feel accepted. They want to belong somewhere.
Part of the pack.
Yeah. And at the same time,
monkeys have families.
Right. And at the same time, we're so paranoid and skeptical when people are showing us the base surface level of what that looks like.
So I think,
and the base surface level is, hey man, you got a nice Hawaiian shirt.
I think the problem is,
I wear a lot of Hawaiian shirts, by the way.
Getting more into the details. So one, why don't you talk more about specific behaviors, maybe some of your own personal experience with some particular behaviors that people have a problem with. And two,
that was your lead in?
Going from, because we're talking about vagaries. You're talking about like a stranger saying, hey, you have a nice dress. I mean,
yes.
But I think we need to get into more the nitty gritty because the problems happen more in relationships when you're working in groups with people.
Yes.
When you're working at a job with somebody.
It's not as often for strangers.
School.
It's more so like people you come across and acquaintances and friends,
people that you
friends,
spend time with.
And all that kind of stuff. Okay. So before this episode, I am having a day. This is how I'm going to start this. I was having a day. In fact, I've had the last 2 days of a day. If you don't know the euphemism for that, it means I was having 2 fucking shitty days and I was very emotional. I still am. Because some social things have come up yet again in my life that have affected other people and more specifically have affected me a great deal. Now,
reoccurring thing that happens to a lot of people on the spectrum is kind of, I don't know what the best, I like to use analogies or metaphors, which I know you're not a big fan of.
Because I don't understand some of them, although I try to pretend like I understand all of them.
I would say maybe it's the ice or the glass shattering. It's this image that you have. You think everything's a certain way, and then occasionally throughout our lives, maybe it's 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, it happens, things kind of build up, and you have this sort of perception of what you think reality is, and then it breaks on you.
I call that playing myself for a fool.
So
I don't know why I immediately think I'm a fool because I fall for this shit, but it's not really falling for. Okay, so basically the reason why we're talking about acceptance today is because I always feel as if I am very accepting, understanding, and compassionate towards other people and their differences. I always try to be as understanding as I can for all people's differences in every way of difference, right? And when I first meet somebody, I let you tell me what your reality is, what your truth is about who you are initially. I accept you up front, the way you speak, the way you emote, the way you do things, right then and there. Okay, this is your presentation. This is who you are. I seem, and especially very recently, this has come up, a little bit of my own baggage. I don't get that same courtesy, or at least I don't feel like I get that same courtesy often. I do with Steve for the most part. We've come to a better place in our relationship, especially while doing this podcast and learning more about autism, accepting each other's autism, accepting each other's eccentricities, which is, I guess, a euphemistic fucking way to say, our differences. But I'm still having issues with other people. And one of the things about that is I am a very emotional human being, which is hard for me to admit. Not only it's hard for me to admit because of all the social conditioning, because I'm a male, because I'm masculine presenting, also because most people assume I'm just hetero. And so because of those assumptions on me, I always feel, and that social expectation, I always feel like I cannot be emotional, right? And I think a lot of men feel that way too. But in that, because I am very highly emotional, and I could probably give excuses or explanation of why I'm so emotional, like being autistic, we're emotional fuckers. Like, we are very emotional people, but I'm also bipolar type 2. I'm a very emotional human being. I ride manic more than I ride depressed, but when I hit depression, I get fucking depressed, like bad. And I've been sitting in like almost a burnout-y fucking place, almost a depression-y kind of place for a little while. And so this moment of finding out that glass has been shattered, that people are not accepting me as much as I thought they were.
Or being fake
or them being fake or not telling me the truth, even though it's what I've always asked for is I've always asked for people just to tell me the truth about me. If you don't like something I just said, fucking talk to me about it. Tell me that you don't like something I just said. But because I'm highly emotional, because I'm highly passionate, as I call it, most people say I'm fucking combative or angry or fucking an assortment of different wording they like to use. I'm a very passionate human being. And I have a lot of conviction in me when it comes to, and I'm very confident when I feel like I believe in something. But that level of passion, people have a hard time handling. And one, why is it my fault? And why is it my fucking problem that other people have a hard time handling other people's emotions? Two, why do I have to stifle, hold down, limit my emotions because of other people when I let other people just show me who they are? But yet I'm the one who has to step up to every social engagement and monitor and moderate and hold back what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, what I'm doing to make other people feel okay. Well, and maybe that's part of masking. I just thought of it. It just occurred to me. Maybe that's part of my masking thing. Maybe that's what I'm masking the whole time is all of that shit. And I'm tired of doing it now.
I think maybe part of that is finding the right kind of people to be around who can handle it.
And in 43 years, I got like 6. I'm sorry. Well,
finding
you told me
the right kind of people who can be around. But also, I think it's okay that some people can't handle it. I think the problem is like maybe it would be nice if people were more honest about not being able to handle it. But it is, I'm okay with people being emotional around me or being passionate. It doesn't bother me, but not everybody can deal with it.
And you're right, 90% of the time it doesn't affect me all that much. You've seen me blow off when people fucking tell me they don't like something I fucking do. You've seen me do it. You've seen me just scoff off fucking people being like, you're an asshole. Okay.
I make fun of you when you get into old man mode when you're like, why do people do it that way? Or your stupid internet lingo. And you make fun of me because I want things to be done a particular way.
Oh, you get real particular. Like I'm particular too about some things, but like,
it's a technology thing. If I care about the way something filmed, or the way it sounds, and you're like, that's stupid.
Like what font? Like you get so meticulous about fonts at times, and I'm always like, what the fuck? It doesn't matter. Those two fonts look the same, and you're like, no, they're not. They're slightly thinner than the other one.
I'm like,
but we all get particular
Patrick Bateman
about it.
And American Psycho.
That's right.
With the font.
Yeah, you doing your cards. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, we kind of deflected a slight bit. I'm most of the time okay with people not accepting me because I do generally, at least for the most part, and I'm just having a bad couple of days with this. For the most part, I love me for who I am, and I accept 90% of the way of who I am. Maybe I'm just having a fucking bad RSD moment or some shit. Maybe I've had just too much of it or whatever the fuck. I don't care what wording we use. It's just I'm 43 years old, and at this point in my life, I've had so many different friend groups and people, and it always comes to the same fucking point. I accept everybody the way they are, and I have to do something different. I have to hide what I am. I have to hide who I am. I have to play pretend of somebody else's fucking rules. And I'm not allowed to have a bad fucking day. Now, there are some people who have accepted me. I mean, you tolerate the shit out of me. A couple of my friends that I've talked about on the show tolerate the shit out of me. My partner tolerates the shit out of me. And I say tolerate because I don't actually know how any of you actually truly feel about me. I'm pretty sure I know how most of you truly feel about me, but I'm having a day of doubt, okay, when it comes to all of that. I'm having a day of it. Because it always comes down to the same thing. Nick's too intense. Nick's cool to hang out with in short spurts. In fact, an old buddy of mine, a person I used to know, used to say, Nick, you're real good to be around for 10, 15 minutes at a time. But maybe you should learn when to walk away and then come back. Which I scoffed off and joked around with it. But it's bothersome to think that I should only be around for 10, 15 minutes at a time. Because any more than that, and people can't handle it anymore.
Well, most people aren't as intense as you are.
I've never met anyone who's as intense as
Which I'm not saying that is an excuse, but I'm just saying maybe other people don't know how to react to that because they're not used to it.
But how come I'm the one who has to do something about that? That's their shit.
How
come I have to do relatively? I mean, we've had our talks, dude. I'm in a fucking headspace right now, and I usually cover up all of this. And I'm not trying to cover it up anymore because I'm trying to be better. I'm trying to be a better person for my kids, because even my daughter at one point said, I'm really glad you're not irritated anymore. Because I'm trying not to cover up my hurt by being angry and being irritated. I'm trying not to cover up my emotionality by just being callous towards people, which is what I used to always do. I used to always seem like I was angry and irritated all the time and irritable, because I didn't want anybody to know how I actually felt about anything. I didn't want anybody to know that I cared about something, because if they know you care about something, they can take it from you. They can hurt you with it. So I never wanted anybody to know. But I'm trying not to do that anymore. I'm trying not to cover up and mask over the way I feel by being angry and irritated and seem like I just don't give a shit that I'm tougher than that, because I'm not. I'm not tougher than that. Fuck, the amount of times I cry in a week is amazing. And the amount of times I have to hold it in until I'm driving. And yes, I'm very highly emotional right now. So anybody listening to this episode, don't pity me and shit, and don't feel bad for me. I'm just being emotional, and I'm kind of writing it off a little bit in my own head because I don't want to feel it. But it does hurt every time people tell me that I'm not worth being around, that I'm okay to have around when they need somebody to talk or be vocal or be loud for them or to advocate on their behalf. But nobody wants me around when they don't need that. I'm a good host to things, because for 10, 15 minutes at a time, I can keep people's attention and make them like me. But anything beyond that, and nobody really wants me around, because I'm just critical or I'm a whole lot of things nobody wants around because I'm too intense. Well, I'm sorry passion bothers you. I'm sorry I'm not passionate in the way everybody wants me to be. The only problem is nobody ever taught me how to be that way. And on top of that, I don't want people to teach me how to socially be passionate. Because, fuck, this ties into it, although I'm probably deviating and deflecting just so I don't have to feel as much. I've told you how I voted for Thanos, multiple presidential elections in a row.
Yeah.
And that's even before Marvel decided to use that asshole as a fucking bad guy. And I always say I voted for Thanos because I think it's a good idea to get rid of half the population.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, no shit.
You could have just voted for Hillary. She would have done the same thing.
I know. I was kind of hoping. Fuck, I was hoping for COVID 10 years ago. No, that's fucked up.
I'm only making that joke because of the conspiracies about the Clintons, okay?
Yeah.
I'm not crapping on.
I mean, there were days where I wish I was part of the random group that didn't exist anymore, that turned to dust. And then on the other side of that, I'm hoping all the people who can't accept another human being for the way they are would go away. I mean, I jokingly say I voted for that. I mean, I actually did vote for Thanos twice. But I jokingly do that. But how come I can't be me? How come I'm the one who always has to make accommodation for others? How come nobody can? And by the way, I'm being very definitive, finite, and being very extremist in my language and all of that. And I'm saying nobody. My wife, my soon-to-be wife, is very accepting of who I am and how I am. But she also knows how to challenge me and question what I'm doing when I get a little bit, too high on my horse with hypomania. She also knows how to let me just be emotional and give me time to bring down my being overstimulated when I'm sensory stuff or when I'm having my meltdowns. She's learned how to do that. And part of the reason why is because she made no assumptions up front of how she knew bipolar and autism to be. And on top of that, I am a performer. I'm an artist or artistic. Autistic. And she lets me be that part of me too.
Wait, does finger painting count?
Yes, it does. Unless you're using poo, and then that's called institutionalization. And I know by the way, I point with my fingers a lot, everybody. It's because I actually talk with my hands a hell of a lot, but when I'm trying to control it, I kind of do it like this.
Wait, so have you thought that if you allowed yourself to be more of who you are and be emotional without it turning into frustration or anger, that maybe that would make people a little bit more accepting of you because you're kind of not being yourself?
No, they wouldn't, because like when people see me get emotional like this, nobody wants to fucking be around either because they can't handle that either. I have so much in so many categories of emotion, and am I saying I have more emotion than you? Not necessarily.
Well,
probably.
That's why I used to write so much poetry that I used to, because that was my way of expressing.
But that's how you can channel.
Is writing.
I can't channel that way. I've tried to channel that way. I've tried to write stories. I've tried to write books. I've tried to write not necessarily poetry, because
I write a blog post that I wrote, or when I write poetry, usually it ends up being like super depressing shit because it's usually how I express that depressing stuff.
But I keep all that stuff to myself. I don't talk about depression anymore because I try to uplift people and I try to inspire people and I try to help them reframe their thought process more so than I do for myself a lot.
There was one other question I wanted to ask you.
Please, because I'm going to probably babble about feeling.
Well,
like
no.
Although I'm kicking myself in my own fucking face right now, by the way, in my head, I'm like shitting on myself for being emotional, especially because we're recording this, but also being emotional in front of you.
Wow, okay.
I would say the same shit to you if you were crying in front of me, but I'm fucking like, I have a lot of, I guess, ableist fucking beliefs in myself right now. Where maybe
have you ever known me to be judgmental about that?
No, and I'm not judgmental in that way either.
But have you? Well, that was kind of my question. Was
okay? So go with.
Have you ever? Like, I like to think that I'm pretty accepting of how people are. Have you ever known me to not be very accepting?
That's a really loaded question, good sir.
I think I try to just take people for who they are.
Kinda.
It doesn't mean that I won't have problems with them, but I pretty much get along and I try to like everybody, or at least try to understand them to the point where, like, I don't have to like everybody, but I try to at least understand where they're coming from. And I think that's also why I tend to make a lot of excuses for people, because I try to think like, I try to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they have a good reason why they're doing that. I try not to go to the negative, like, well, they're just a shit person or this or that. I try to understand, like, well, maybe they get this going on, they get this, and that. And I try to, even shitty, like horrible people, which we've talked about before when I play devil's advocate, which some people hate the term devil's advocate. And I try to understand people's shitty behavior. Like, if you're fucking, why would somebody go and be a neo-Nazi? And I'm like,
but that's also,
I don't want to excuse that behavior, but like, I try to put myself in the position of like, maybe this person's poor and they grew up with all the shitty things going on. And, you know, they go down this dark path and they end up in this dark place.
Right.
And anyway, but my question to you was like, I think that I try to be pretty accepting of people and their differences.
So before I answer that, so I go through this whole emotional thing and I'm saying all that stuff. And your question is, are you understanding and accepting of people?
Well, it made me think about if I'm accepting of other people.
It's a very autistic moment, good sir. It's a very autistic moment.
Well, I was also listening to everything else you said.
I'm being very emotional and all of that. And what occurred to you was to find out from me if you're judgmental. No, and I'm not shitting on you at all. I'm not critiquing you. I'm not saying it's a bad thing at all. It's a very autistic thing.
Well, my first thought was maybe you should try to
fix it.
No, try to be yourself a little bit more. Or that's what I asked you first. I said, hey, if you acted this way.
You know,
but my second question,
I just thought it was interesting that that's where you went, but I totally get why you went there. I get it. I'm not saying anything bad about what you did or that thought process. As far as letting it out, when I first got diagnosed with, and I'll answer your question. Actually, I'll answer your question real fucking quick and easy. The short answer is no. No, you're not judgmental at people. That's the short answer. Long answer is there are some times and with some groups of people that you are a little less understanding than others. But that goes for everyone on the planet. I mean, personally, I try to make everybody think that I don't care about anybody.
Well, it's just annoying that people make certain assumptions. It's like growing up. And this kind of ties into what you were saying, but in a different way. It's like growing up, I always had friends from all different groups. Like I had friends who were, one of my friends growing up was a gay Puerto Rican kid.
Yeah.
And he was the only Puerto Rican kid in our school, and he happened to be gay. And I don't give a shit about people who are gay or lesbian or this.
Right.
And I'm only bringing those things up because I grew up in a school that was like mostly just very white and very one way. And there's a lot of Catholic kids and stuff. And so we didn't have a lot of, there weren't a lot of gay kids. There weren't a lot of minorities.
You ever notice how you hesitate when you say white? Did you ever notice that?
No.
All right.
But my point is that I'd never really gave a shit. I just was trying to be nice to everybody, right? I just, whatever.
Right.
Like I didn't think about it like, oh, that's my gay friend. Like, but my point is that what made me uncomfortable was when people would make assumptions. Like they would say like, for instance, if I had like 3 or 4 friends who were gay and then people were like assuming that I'm gay or something, which I don't care if people think I'm gay or not. But the point is that why do you automatically assume that you have to be gay to have gay friends? That's the part that bothered me.
Well, it's kind of that prototyping kind of thing that like generalization or boxing in people have. They just automatically make that assumption.
Or make assumptions like if you hang out with, used to hang out with a lot of black kids.
Yeah.
So if you hang out with a bunch of black kids and people make certain assumptions about you because of, but why do I have to be a certain thing to get along with black people? Or why do I have to be a certain thing to get along with gay kids or what is it? I don't know. That stuff never made sense to me.
Me neither. I just kind of hung out with people. But it's also, it's probably what makes up who we are is because me and you know that those things are there, but we don't tailor our behavior based on that.
People make assumptions about me because of the people that I spoke to, but I'm like, they're just people. Like,
and they also assume a lot of the times that you're a Republican just because you were having a conversation about a topic and you didn't automatically agree with the person.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. Well, I'm putting that in context because that's the same thing.
Or if I make a Hillary Clinton joke.
Right. Yeah. If you make, even though you'll make a joke about any politician, but they don't know that, they just automatically make that assumption. And I get a lot of that at me too. The things that I keep from most people, because people don't care about this part, or at least it always seems like they don't care about this part, is like, if you have an opinion about anything whatsoever, about any direction, I don't care. I don't care like that you have an opinion that I don't agree with. I will still accept you as the human being you are. You could have the most ignorant, hateful opinion about any group of people on the planet, and I'm not going to hate you because I don't believe in hating a human being. I don't believe in hating people. You can dislike their opinion, but don't hate the human being who said it, because that human being has a whole lot of a history, a whole lot of a life that might have created that opinion, and there might be a valid reason why they have that opinion. Like some people say there's no excuse for hate. I'm pretty sure I could come up with a couple of scenarios where people would be like, well, it makes sense that you hate that person. You know what I mean? Or some like stereotype or racist or sexist or I don't know, any of those fucking words, any of those isms.
A radio host in what country was it? Rwanda, right?
What?
The guy who caused or was largely responsible for the genocide over there.
Oh yeah, the Rwandan genocide, yeah.
But he was a radio host, wasn't he?
Yeah, well,
and he was like basically spewing hate on the radio.
Right.
But he I don't want to say brainwashed, but he managed to scapegoat these people enough to like people picked up arms and started harming these people because of the shit he was saying on. Right. But he convinced people that they were a problem.
Right. Because he I'm assuming that he used like
it doesn't excuse the behavior of the people who went and like killed or harmed all those people, but just like understanding that people can be led down dark paths.
They can, and sometimes like, well, I mean, straight up, like I can't believe we bring it up as often as we do, like World War II, right? One of the main reasons why a certain human being in World War II took power was literally because he was able to galvanize people's hate in a specific direction. He actually got people's pain in their life to be fueled and directed at one group of people. Whether it's true or not that they had anything to do with whatever state the country was in at the time, through his language, he was able to guide their pain into hating an entire group of people.
Well, I was just going to
and
say,
then treat them poorly because of it, and justify the poor behavior they took on somebody by saying your pain is valid at these people.
Well, you said that we bring up World War II a lot. I don't think we bring it up that much.
Not
but
often,
people
but
talk
often
about it
enough.
People talk about it a lot because it's very fascinating from a historical point of view, but also from a psychological point of view.
From a social context, yeah, it's a very interesting thing.
Like all of the stuff that happened as a result of that. And the world would be very different today had that never happened. I mean, you think of everything that happened with the Soviet Union and the Cold War and everything that happened after it. With also the nuclear weapons and everything else.
I agree. It's just like the podcast that I listen to, I don't think I've ever heard them bring up World War II ever. And we've brought it up in several episodes. But one of the reasons why is because we also do look at it from that context too.
It's very interesting. Also, like when I read Viktor Frankl's book.
Stuff
like that.
Well, I mean, the fact that he had empathy for his guards, I thought was rather fascinating too, where he was able to see that some of the guards were there because it was a job and they needed to protect their own families and they needed to take care of their families. And so they were willing to cross moral lines that they wouldn't necessarily anyway, because they were trying to protect their own families, let alone,
Well, there's a lot of interesting.
And then there were guards who were just shitty.
And we've also mentioned before too, another interesting one, like the Stanford prison experiment.
You
mentioned before. If anybody doesn't know that, you should look it up because it's interesting.
You really should. And if we ever misrepresent it, whatever.
Well, I mean, basically the synopsis of it is it kind of shows what happens when you give people unrestrained power.
Yes.
It shows what people are capable of. You take people who were otherwise, quote, air quote, morally good or morally whatever you want.
Although I don't believe in moral good or bad. I believe everyone's just morally neutral.
But it shows what happens when you
give, we're all capable of good
when
and
you
bad.
give power to people. And how a lot of people can't handle it.
Right.
And dehumanizing other people too.
Right.
I mean, that's a big part of it. It's the power, but also how the students involved in the experiment, the prison guards, dehumanized the students that were prisoners.
All right.
And once you dehumanize somebody, what you're willing to do to them.
Yeah. All right.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine. How many times do I bump the mic on a regular? Come on. I do it all on a regular basis.
But dehumanization happens all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about...
We kind of fell off acceptance a bit there.
No, I mean, it does have to do with acceptance.
No,
Dehumanizing people.
It does.
We talked about social media earlier, just briefly about the topics of...
I'm just feeling a lot of shame because I was doing all that emotional shit. So now we're straying in another direction, which is why I'm
dehumanize you. Can't dehumanize you. But I'm saying that autistic...
What would be the word for, not dehumanizing, but what would be the D word if we're not letting people be who they are? Whether it be bipolar or autistic or just be a Nick. What would that word be? Because people aren't dehumanizing me, but they're absolutely training me to not be who I am.
But autistic people are dehumanized in general.
I think to a degree. I think some of that is also us doing it to ourselves to a degree, because we're not letting ourselves be individuals.
I'm not trying to compare us to like genocide victims.
No. We're not comparing that at all.
I'm just saying that
I do believe very much so.
Dehumanization that goes all online on social media, the way people treat each other as groups that aren't important.
Well, I also think in our own community, and this probably happens in a lot of other communities too, but I think in our own community for being autistic or even just neurodivergent, I think we ourselves are trying to dictate how we ourselves are going to behave. And I think one of the problems that I see is not only are we just saying autism is everything and all at all times, is everything and everything of what you are, which is true, but we're also saying, like, I don't know, I'm trying to word this to get at my point for it. I think there's a level of over-accepting that some people do, and I think there's a level of under-accepting the differences and the different behaviors in which some of us display. I think on both sides, and I think there's actually there's pockets of people in our community that accept all of our community. And I think there are pockets of our community that accept what they want to tolerate for autistic behavior and what is and is not autistic behavior. Like there's a group in our community that still wants to be referred to as Asperger, who still want to be called Aspies. Okay. And it's not really a small group of people. But then there are other people who are like, no, fuck you. If you're going to use that word, I never want to talk to you ever. So basically you're excluding other autistic people just because you don't agree with the word they're using. And I understand why you don't agree with the word they're using, but that's what makes them feel comfortable. That word, that label on themselves, they've grown an identity with it. And that's how they want to explain themselves. But it's just a fucking word. And you're basically denying that person's existence because you don't like the origin of where the word came from. How about accept the human being who's behind that word? As well as there are a group of people who still want to say high function, low function. Okay. There's a group of people who want to use the level 1, 2, and 3. There's people who don't like the 1, 2, and 3, who just want to call it high, low support needs and profound autism or some shit. And there's another group of people who thinks we cannot quantify the level of support somebody needs, that we're all just autistic and that's it, which, by the way, to me is completely like making level 3 or profound autistic people invisible. So that's my personal stance on that. I went all heady and intellectualized, so I didn't have to feel.
The internal politics stuff is somewhat important, but I think if you get embroiled in battles about terminology and arguing over semantics, then it's hard to actually accomplish anything that's worthwhile or accomplish anything that actually helps autistic people.
I agree with that too. I agree with that, especially on like an acceptance level of like a social acceptance level. But I think even just inside our community, I don't think we need to have a consensus on the wording, but we need to have a consensus of the acceptance or the understanding of one another, which we still don't have either, because there are still people who say that, you know, here are the X behaviors in which autism is, and people who don't have all of those or these ones in particular, well, you're not really this or that when it comes to neurodivergent or when it comes to autistic.
They'll say you're.
I mean, and then there are still the people who, God, I fucking hate the fact that this is not part of my lexicon. But there are still the people who are so hyper against ableist and ableist language and the thought process of ableism. I'll be honest with you,
I understand ableism, but I don't understand a lot of times when people. So I know what ableist means.
Yes.
And I understand the concept of ableism.
Yes.
But there's a lot of times when people say that things are ableist and I don't know what they mean.
Right. There were times, same with me as well.
So they're saying that's ableist and I'm like, how? I don't, and I'm not trying to be like an asshole, or I'm not trying to.
I mean, we're new to this journey about ableism, I just don't
get like if there's a clear case of ableism where it's black and white, but there's a lot of times where it's something that's kind of in the middle or gray and somebody says it's ableist and I'm like, I don't understand how that's ableist. I'm not saying it is or it isn't. I'm saying I don't understand why you're saying it's ableist.
Wait, me and you have a hard time catching on to subtleties?
No, but it's like, I forget what, there was something somebody posted a while ago and somebody commented saying there was ableist and all this stuff. And I was like, and I had no clue why they were calling it. It didn't make sense to me at all. And then, but a lot of times also people who say that stuff, if I ask them to explain,
well, they can't even really.
They either don't want to, or they can't, or they think I'm trolling them.
So,
but I'm not trolling you. I'm just like, I honestly don't understand what you're saying.
That right there, automatically assuming you're doing it out of some spiteful, malicious way.
Well, there are a lot of trolls online.
So what? But that doesn't mean everybody is. Wait, you just made my point. Ooh, remember that the thing I was talking about before? Let's rewind and go to back to the beginning of all of this when I was making that example of the person walking up to the barista and saying, complimenting her.
Yeah.
What you just said. We automatically assume somebody's statement is trolling because there are trolls out there. Instead of, let's find out what they mean. Let's find out in good faith if this person is trying to figure out what is ableism or what is ableist statements. And when people say, well, you should just know. Fuck you. No, you shouldn't just know.
So, I've been accused of this. That's what I was looking.
Sea lioning.
Sea lioning.
By the way, for one, why are we putting ing at the end of that?
Sea lioning is a type of behavior.
Why are we making fun of sea lions?
So, you know what trolling is.
Yeah.
Sea lioning is basically asking questions in bad faith.
Okay. So how does a person know it's in bad faith if you're just asking a single question?
So it's asking for evidence.
I'm just trying to have a debate. What is wrong with debating? Anyway.
So it's basically if you're trying to troll somebody by asking for evidence
and feigning ignorance.
Right.
Wait, hold on. I'm reading this. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Steve. It sounds like all of this is dependent on somebody else's observation, subjective, a fucking opinion.
Well, so
feigning ignorance.
You can see why somebody.
Maybe I'm just fucking dumb. I don't know all of your grand terminology, and quite frankly, I'm tired of fucking learning new fucking words.
Well, you can see why somebody who's autistic would easily be accused of sea lining.
Yo, yeah, absolutely,
so
absolutely.
People consider it trolling or harassment.
Yeah.
Now, I would say I wouldn't harass somebody. It would more be like there was a chat going on,
right?
Like and I commented and I replied asking somebody to clarify something because I didn't understand what they meant.
While maintaining a pretense of civility and sincerity.
Yeah, so it's being polite and asking somebody to give you evidence. So if somebody makes an assertion and say, I assert that this is true. And then I say, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't heard about that. Can you give me some evidence or tell me where you found that? And then they think that you're not doing it in good faith. Basically, you're not asking sincerely. You're asking to troll them. In other words, it's trolling or harassing them by asking them to prove everything they're saying. So if you start talking about like, well, vaccines don't cause autism, and then they say, well, what's the evidence that vaccines don't cause autism? I'd be interested to see some of that stuff. Can you show me some evidence that vaccines don't cause autism?
Wait, what's the harm in doing that? Because every time somebody says vaccines give people autism, immediately assholes go, where's your fucking evidence? So why can't you do it in reverse?
Well, I was just pointing this out.
I know. It's just
I've been accused of doing that.
I guess maybe I was accused of it too, but then I went real petty and just started making fun of him anyway. I just completely derailed and went off subject. It's the assumption to that. It's you know what? A lot of what I'm talking about is exactly that. Is everybody hates assumptions, but everybody loves to use assumptions. Everybody uses assumptions so much so and tries to assume they know fucking behavior that fucking well.
Well, it's hard.
And there might be some people who are that fucking researchy smart when it comes to behavior and psychology and whatnot. But I doubt there's enough of them to necessitate everyone on the fucking internet.
I think the problem is a lot of times when people do things like that on the internet, they probably are trolling, but not everybody.
That's the point though. Not everybody.
The problem is I ask a lot of questions. And so a lot of times people think that I'm acting in bad faith because they think that I'm just trying to troll them or something.
Because they're assuming that you are, and that's them, not you.
So because I've also gotten into comment fights with people on Reddit where I was asking questions and people thought I was being an asshole, but I was really just trying to understand what they were saying.
I have such a fucking problem with Reddit. I
was like, oh, so what do you mean by that?
Actually, let me rephrase. I don't have a problem with Reddit. I have a fucking drastic problem with the majority of fuckers who write shit on fucking Reddit. Because you've never once told me about a good back and forth conversation with anybody on Reddit. You've only ever told me about like shitty fucking like assholes.
I did read a really interesting story the other day on Reddit, but I'll tell you about it.
Okay, please.
Off camera.
Yeah, thanks. Are we getting close to that time?
Oh, we're way past the time.
Okay, because I only had like 10 minutes to be able to cry, and it seems like it's out of context at this point.
Oh. Do you want to cry some more?
Well, I mean, actually, yes. I would love to be able to cry for the rest of the afternoon if I could, but I'm not allowed to do that. I've got to put on a happy face or some shit.
Well, we can pick up this conversation another time.
Yeah, we're probably going to have another, because you don't like... And this is not me doing a critique on you. This is just purely me saying this, differences in our behavior. Like, you don't get emotional, you write. I get very visibly emotional in one way or the other, like in 1,001 directions. And like the difference is this is not the only time this is going to happen on this podcast. Like, this is probably going to happen again, mostly because if we keep doing this, motherfucker, I'm going to have bad fucking days. And I'm going to be emotional and shit. And I'm always going to question whether I should let this information out or make, the way I behave public like that. But it's just always going to be there because I have those two sides of me that, and it sounds like I'm making a fucking, like in my own head, I'm telling myself, you're just making fucking excuses. Stop fucking crying. It's not that big of a deal, you fucking baby. Like, that's the shit I'm saying to myself in my own fucking head. Which it probably sounds ableist for all I fucking know.
Sounds like internalized misandry, internalized.
It's a level of
masculinity.
Yeah, well, it's some of that, definitely. It's some internalized dislike of that I'm doing that, and it's always the voice of my brother. Although I do not want to make people think the wrong opinion about my brother. My brother is a nice, wonderful person. And he's always supported me, but I always hear his voice in my head when I have like the masculine fucking toxic voice go off. It's always his
Morgan
voice.
Freeman in mine.
I would love to have Morgan Freeman tell me to be more of a man. That'd be great.
No,
I'd have to listen.
I just bottle it all up like a real man and then just type it out.
I got to tell you, man, I've been to 2 institutions for I'm not allowed to say the S word anymore.
Well,
deletion ideation. Is that what we should say?
You have seen me break down maybe once.
Twice total. And by the way, the second time was an almost breakdown.
I don't break down very often.
No, you don't. You got real red in the face, and I saw the tears forming on the eyes. But then you were very quick to like deflect, and I was like, okay, we're gonna deflect now, and we're gonna keep doing that. I didn't push it because of where we were.
I also get angry.
Well, I've kind of seen the angry. Not really, but kind of.
Because
you hide emotion rather well.
Keep it all in.
Yeah. And then you write me a big, long thing.
Anyway. All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the episode.
Well, I hope so too. And, if you just think I'm a whiny baby, that's fine too.
We're going to talk more about acceptance in the future.
We definitely are.
And maybe about adult autism and diagnosis and stuff, because I wanted to touch on that too.
We do need to talk about all that jazz. Thank you very much for listening. Hopefully you didn't check out after 2 minutes. Okay, bye.
Bye.